Hello, my name is Tony Berard, and today's video is going to be on chess and dice chess for newcomers. I wouldn't say beginners, newcomers. Anyway, I had a discussion with somebody and they said my videos were too hard, so make the video more approachable. So I shall do that. So this video assumes you have never played a game of chess before. So, so let's even ask a more basic question. Why even play a board game at all? And so, board games have been around for a long time in mankind's history. Senet is real, or it might be Senet, I don't know, Senet. It's a really, really old game. It's probably the oldest game we know of. So mankind has been playing board games for a long, long time, going back to the dawn of civilization. And nowadays we have computers, with the video games and all the interactions, and most of them are based on killing or stealing or some other kind of human vice. But, there was a female recently who had a video game on helping and being kind. And the more you help and be kind, that's how you gain points. She won a female programmer of the year or something. I don't know, some kind of an award like that. And so, and there's other kinds of games like Marble Madness or something. It's a video game where you roll these marbles across these difficult mazes of things. So it's an eye-hand coordination kind of game. And so, the video games, they provide quite a array of skills to display. But the board game provides something that they don't. It's a rather simple set of rules, and the game is capable of a great variety of manipulation. And so the two players engage in this manipulation to try to gain an upper hand to win the game. Sometimes they can't win the game and it's a draw, but when there is a victory, that's pretty cool. Of course, it's not cool for the loser. When you play chess and other board games, when you lose, yeah, it's terrible. But it's not like boxing, where you get your block knocked off, So, and I've seen some pretty gruesome fights. I saw one MMA fight where the guy hit the guy so hard, the guy was, going backwards, and his head hit the chain fence, before he crumpled to the ground. I mean, that was such a hard hit that it knocked the guy back that hard, So, board games do not do that to the combatants. After one loses, one just shakes off the ego or whatever, or the bruise of the ego, and try again, So, board games provide that. And these games are so complex that no one can play them perfectly. No one, not even the world champion in any board game, can't play it perfectly. Well, if there's any sophistication to the game at all. I can play tic-tac-toe perfectly. And that's a 3x3. You could go to a 2x2. Whoever moves first automatically wins because there's only 4 squares. You take one of them, the other guy puts one in one of the other 3 spots, and no matter which one you pick, you win. So 2x2 tic-tac-toe is a guaranteed win for the player who goes first. And even a 1x1, it's even simpler. Whoever moves first puts their X or O in the box, and that's it. 1 in a row, victory. So I'm talking about games that are have beyond that in terms of complexity. So So we'll take the example of chess as our base value of complexity. And so, having said all of that, let's look at a little bit about chess. All right, this is a chess pawn. It starts out on the second rank. The ranks are labeled A, B, C, D, E, or the files. Files go this way. So this is the A file, the B file, the C file, D, E, F, G, and H file. And these are the ranks. First rank, second rank, third rank, fourth rank, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. And this pawn right now is on the second rank. And so pawns in chess, they can move up 1 square or up 2 squares on their initial move. And pawns move straight ahead. If you get a pawn to the last rank, then you can take one of the other pieces, like a queen. Most of the time people take a queen. But you could take a knight, a bishop, or a rook. Sometimes under promotion is important. Most of the time, though, it's not important, and you just take a queen without any thought about it. But pawns can capture diagonally. So like if there's this pawn here, this pawn can capture that pawn. And so it moves off of this file. And if there was a pawn here, this pawn could capture that way. And so that's how pawns capture. So they cannot get to these spots unless there is an opposing piece there. If you have a friendly piece here, the pawn will not capture its own friendly bishop. That doesn't happen. So the pawn will either move ahead now or stay put. There's one kind of a complicated rule. It's called capture and passing. Suppose I get my pawn here. And since the other guy can move his pawn up 1 or up 2, the rule changers back in some time in the past thought, well, you know, if this guy advances 2, look at that. It advanced over the capture square of this guy. What do we do about that? So they said for the next turn, if this happens, then the pawn can capture to this capture square anyway, as if this pawn had advanced only 1 square. That rule is called capture and passing. Myself, I don't think that that was necessary. This pawn is a little advanced. It's in enemy territory. Why should it be given some kind of extra power? If this happens, well, it passed this guy by. He should not get a benefit. But I didn't make that rule. So that's the rule that was devised by some other people at some other time in history. I am merely reporting it. Okay, so that is how the pawns work. And I guess I should say, the pawns are the soul of chess. That was a chess maxim that was uttered in the 1700s by a great chess player named Francois-André Daniken-Philidor. He said that. And many people have wondered over the years and centuries what he meant by that the pawns are the soul of chess. I've written a book on The Flaws, Death, and Successor to Chess, Tines and Barbs. That's the name of it. It's available on Amazon if you want to get it. That's my inventor's book for my great game of Tines and Barbs. I've since invented a number of other games, and Tines and Barbs is still great. No doubt about it. It took me 17 years to get that guy done. But so anyway, after having invented a number of board games, I can say something about the pawns being the soul of chess. If you have 2 pawns like this guy's capture squares are here and here. And this guy's capture squares are here and here. And so if you have the opposing king, I'm looking in my box for the king, in case you're wondering what I'm doing. There he is. So here's the king. And this king can go one space in any direction. So if you visualize the square ring around the king, these squares here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This ring of 8 squares, it forms a square itself. Observe, it's a square. So it's not really a ring. But this, these two pawns controlling these 4 squares prevent the king from coming to these spots. And so these 3 squares in particular are blocked from this king. And so now this king only has access to these back 5 squares. One of the things we try to do in chess is to induce a checkmate. And so one of the things in preparation for a checkmate is to cut off the squares from the king. And so if we had another piece, this is a rook. Rooks move like a plus sign. So it can move like that and along this way. If it's here, it can move this way and this way. So this plus sign, let's suppose this rook is here. So it's blocking off these squares of the king. So 1, 2, 3. Now there's only 2 squares left. And so the queen can go in any of the 8 directions, the full length of the board. And so if this queen, let's say, is here, then she can move to here along the diagonal. Now once she's here, she cuts off these last 2 remaining squares and the king is in check. So these 2 pawns, this rook is cutting off most of the squares of the king. This queen move, coming from here to here, is blocking off the last set of squares of the king. And so now the king has no flight squares. We call them flight squares. When the king moves, that's called flight. And so no matter where the king moves, they're all covered. So this king is checkmated right now. And where the complexity comes in is, suppose let's say black's queen was here and this queen was here. So if this queen comes to here, it's not checkmate now because we have something in chess called interposition. You can interpose a piece between the checking piece and the king. So now this queen prevents the black queen prevents the white queen from checking the king. And so when there's a whole bunch of pieces on the board, the trick is to find the move that does the job. So, and you know, you get to only make one move on a turn. And so what turn do you do? You know, well, you have to use all kinds of logic and stuff to figure it out. So, one of the big things that chess players will do is they'll study the endgame. Well, I guess I should, before I get to that. The other guy is a bishop. This bishop moves like an X. So it goes along this black diagonal and along this black diagonal. And observe that no matter when you move, or where you move, I should say, you're always going to get 2 black diagonals, except if you go into the corner. Then you only get this black diagonal. But if you move over to here, say, then you get this and this. Always an X. Here and here. So this, we call this the dark squared bishop, because it's on the dark squares. And so it can never get off of the dark squares. And you can have another bishop. Actually, every game starts out where each player has 2 of these guys. This would be the light squared bishop, because it's going to stay on the light squares. And if this bishop goes into the corner here, it only can come out along this one diagonal. But if it's on any other diagonal, then it has two possibilities. So these two guys can be side by side like this, up and down, or even separated by some other distance. But they'll never be on the same color, because this is the dark squared bishop, that's the light squared bishop. And so that's the bishops. They work good together. A lot of times in chess games, a player will strive to get the two bishops over either a knight and a bishop or a pair of knights. The two bishops is a decided advantage in Grandmaster games. Sometimes that alone is enough to win the game. I did the rook. I guess the knight is next. The knight moves kind of funny. The knight moves in an L shape, so it can go up 2 and over 1, or up 2 and over 1. And so I'm going to use the white pawns to show where the knight can move. So there's 8 squares that a knight can move to. And the knight can hop over pieces, friendly or not friendly. That's one of the quirks that the inventors built into the knight. They said it can jump over pieces. So we got that guy here and the last two here. So here's where the knight can move. This is the L shape. So here's the 8 squares. And observe that when the knight starts on a white, it'll land on a black. All these squares are black. And let's suppose if the knight is here, then all the squares it can jump to are white. So a knight is forever changing the color it's on. So it changes from a black square to a white square and a white square to a black square every time it moves. That's one of the quirks of the knight. And so knights can sometimes block off the king, 2 of the king squares like that, sometimes like that, but never like this, because the king can never get on 2 squares that far apart in a single turn. And so the knight can help out in checkmates, usually in this fashion or this fashion. Sometimes only 1 square, just depends. Like if the king is here, then only this one is useful for blocking off the squares that a king can move to. Okay, so that is the knight. Now there's a couple special rules in chess. Where's the king? And a rook. And sometimes beginners, newcomers, they get confused by this. But let's say the king and the rook are here. If the king is not moved, and neither has the rook, and the 2 intervening squares have been cleared out, then the king can move 2 places towards the rook, and the rook can swing around the king like so. That move is called a castle. In chess, there is some stipulations, though. Suppose black has his light squared bishop there, and observe that this square is covered by this black bishop. Then the chess rules say this king cannot jump over this square. And so a castle is not possible because it's controlled by this bishop. And so the king has to stay here. Or sometimes what chess players will do is they'll move the king up and then get the rook into the game like so, and then move the king over here. Then this is called artificial castling, because the player had to do it over the course of a couple of turns instead of a single turn. But sometimes there's a pawn here, and it never got moved out, and the king can't go here. So if the bishop is controlling these, then the king can't get past this little barrier to get over to here. So it might have to stay there. Now, there are 2 rooks at the beginning of the game. If the player clears out these 3 spots, then a castle might be possible the other way. So the king would move 2 places towards the rook, and the rook is placed over the hopped over square of the king. So that would be a queenside castle. On the score sheet, if you ever see O-O, that means a kingside castle. If you see O-O-O, that's a queenside castle. So that special rule in chess has solved a couple of the problems in the opening of the game. Generally, these 2 pawns will start out in front of the king. There'll be a whole rank of pawns in the opening position, but these 2 pawns are what I want to talk about. The most famous opening move for white is that. And then on a later turn, a player might do that or might do that. And why would a player want to do that? Because it opens lines for the bishops. The bishops can get out and stuff, and the queen too. Because this whole row of pawns being in the front, only the knights can get out. In order to get the other pieces out, pawn moves have to be made to open lines to get the other pieces out. So that's one reason why you want to move these pawns up, so you can get your other pieces out. But the other reason is these 4 squares that we talked about earlier, the capture squares. These 2 are controlled by this guy, and these 2 are controlled by this guy. And if you have the 2 pawns like that, that's pretty powerful. That's in the black camp. So the black player can't post any of the major pieces here because the pawns will capture them. The player can put pawns here, of course. And that's where the battle will rage. So it's desirable to get these middle pawns out because it opens important lines to get the other pieces out and stuff like that. But it also opens lines for the opponent. The opponent can put a bishop here or something like that. Check. Now the king's in danger. And so, what to do about that? Well, of course, the answer is the castling move. The castling move, we'll do that. Tuck the king away, and the king will have 3 pawns here. Sometimes a player will move the center pawn up of these 3 and put a bishop here. And so then you get this little phalanx of pawns with a bishop here protecting the light squares, and the pawns protect the black squares. And that's a pretty powerful formation, and it makes it quite difficult to get at the king. So that's some of the ideas there behind castling. It gives the king a place of safety, and the player still gets to fight for the center. So without the castling move, that isn't possible. I've invented a chess variant called fighting chess that it gets rid of some of the stipulations involved with castling. In my game Fighting Chess, you can castle across the check. You can even castle into check if you want. Because in chess, the king is inviolate. And in my game, I stripped the king of that inviolateness. Part of being inviolate means you cannot move into check. So, suppose this was like this, then let's say black had a rook here. So black is controlling, well, let's not put the bishop there, because then black will castle into check. So black would like to castle, but black hopped over this, or white hopped over this control square of the black rook. And so by doing that, the chess rules have declared that since the king is inviolate, that's actually illegal. You cannot endanger the king, even briefly. Yeah, it occurred, the 2 steps, but the king passed over a danger square, and the king is inviolate. The king is not allowed to be put in danger, ever. And so the rules say this inviolateness extends to this not being able to castle across a check, because the king's inviolate. In my chess variant, we would call it, I do declare that a king can castle across this. Alright. So I covered the basics on how to move the pieces, but more needs to be said. And I didn't even get to dice chess at all. So looks like this is going to be a series of videos. I'm going to call it Chess and Dice Chess for Newcomers. And this is part 1 of the series, so this will be continued over time. So if you want to get a game of dice chess, which I didn't get to talk about it too much, but it's at www.thegamecrafter.com. And you can put in a search for dice chess. I guess I should show it right side up. Dice chess. And you'll get a set of dice. You'll get you'll get one of these white king cubes, and you'll get, where is it? I guess I need to see with my own eyes. There it is. Set it through the camera. This is the black king cube, and each player will get 15 of these, and they'll go on this board, but that all has to be discussed in the next video. Alright, for now, this is Tony Berard signing off.